The morning my parents told me they were handing our bakery to my younger sister, I was up to my wrists in sourdough starter. It was the same starter my grandmother had kept going for decades. The kind you feed without thinking, like it has its own schedule, its own quiet demands. I had the metal bowl tucked against my hip, flour dust on my forearms, and the ovens were doing their steady low hum in the background. My hands stopped, not dramatically. They just paused in place, like my body was waiting for my brain to catch up. My mom didn't look at me when she said it. She stood near the prep table with her purse still on her shoulder, like she'd only stepped in for a minute. My dad cleared his throat the way he does when he's trying to sound official. And my sister sat on the edge of the stainless counter, legs crossed at the ankle, smiling like the decision had already been made weeks ago. Not a polite smile, not a nervous one. Just a small, calm smile that said she'd expected it. I remember noticing my apron in that moment, white with tiny blue flowers, my name stitched on the pocket. I'd worn one version of that apron since I was a teenager, back when I needed a step stool to reach the top shelf. I stood there with my palms still tacky from dough, and I understood something simple and heavy. I had given years to this place, and they had already decided I wasn't the one they wanted. A few hours later, I would find a folded document on the corner of my workstation, pushed under a stack of recipe cards like someone didn't want it to be obvious. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at it for a long time. And I kept baking like nothing had happened, because the dough didn't care what anyone had decided. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Mara. I'm 32 years old, and I've worked at Hollis Bakery since I was old enough to lift a sheet pan without wobbling. My grandmother opened the shop in 1983 in a small neighborhood outside Cleveland, back when the main road still had more empty storefronts than restaurants. The bakery was a narrow space with a bell on the door that chimed too loud and a front window that always fogged up in winter. My grandmother knew everyone. Not in a forced way either. She remembered things because she actually paid attention. She'd ask about your kid's soccer game while she slid your cinnamon buns into a paper bag. She'd notice if you switched from cream to oat milk. She'd hold back a loaf if she knew you came in after your shift. When she got older, my parents took over the paperwork and the payroll. They handled the business end. But the feel of the bakery, the rhythm of it, stayed the same. Same early mornings. Same flour on the floor no matter how much you swept. Same butter smell that clung to your hair even after you showered. I started coming in after school when I was 16. At first I did small things. I wiped tables. I labeled containers. I learned how to fold boxes without crushing the corners. Then I learned the real work, the kind you only learn by doing it over and over until your hands know it before you do. Mixing dough until it goes from shaggy to smooth. Listening to the mixer change pitch when the gluten starts to form. Watching the surface of a proofing loaf for that slow, steady rise. Pulling croissants at the exact moment the layers set. Not a minute too early, not a minute too late. My sister Ainsley is 5 years younger than I am. Growing up, she was the one who could talk her way out of anything. If I forgot my homework, it was my fault. If she forgot hers, it was somehow a misunderstanding. She was charming in a way that made adults lean closer, like they wanted to be included in whatever she was saying. While I was waking up at 4:15 in the morning during holiday rushes, Ainsley was sleeping in. While I learned how to fix a batch that was too wet, she was taking selfies behind the counter when she stopped by. She went to college for marketing and communications. She came home on holidays and stood in front of the bakery sign like it was a landmark. She posted photos with captions about tradition and legacy and being grateful for where she came from. People would comment hearts and say how lucky she was. Most of those people never saw her scrape burnt sugar off a pan, or stay late to shape rolls for a catering order, or handle a supplier who delivered the wrong flour twice in 1 month. I didn't resent her for leaving. That part was fine. People take different paths. What I didn't understand, at least not then, was how easily my parents started mistaking her confidence for commitment. To me, the bakery wasn't just work. It was a routine my body understood. It was the warm air that hits your face when you open the oven door, the thin crackle sound when a good loaf cools on the rack, The way the shop smells like vanilla and toasted nuts even when the lights are off. It was Mrs. Klein, who came every Saturday at the same time for blueberry muffins and always asked me, quietly, how I was doing. It was a high school kid we hired one summer who later told me, years after he'd moved away, that the bakery was where he learned how to show up on time for something. It was mine in every way except whatever was printed on legal papers. And I know how that sounds. Like I should have asked more questions. Like I should have demanded everything in writing. But when you're in it every day, year after year, you stop thinking of it as a job you could lose. You start thinking of it as a life you're building. That morning started like most mornings. I arrived while it was still dark, the streetlights casting that dull orange glow on the sidewalk. I let myself in through the back door with my key, flipped on the kitchen lights, and stood for a second in the quiet before I turned on the ovens. The bakery has a particular silence at that hour. Not empty exactly, just still. The mixers are off. The front bell doesn't ring. The world hasn't started asking for things yet. I tied my apron, washed my hands, and fed the starter. The surface bubbled a little when I stirred it, alive and sour, familiar in a way that was hard to explain. I started the first dough of the day, measured out flour by weight the way my grandmother insisted, and checked the proofing cabinet temperature like I always did. When my parents walked in at 6, it felt wrong. They usually didn't show up until after the first rush had already started. My dad still had his coat on. My mom's hair looked like she'd rushed it. And then Ainsley followed them, dressed like she was going to a meeting, not a bakery. Clean shoes, fitted jacket, phone in hand. My dad said my name like he was calling me into an office. "Mara, we need to talk." I wiped my hands on a towel and glanced at the clock. My voice came out steady. "Can it wait? I've got 3 orders going out at 7. "It's important," my mom said, and her eyes stayed on the table instead of my face. We sat at the small table by the front window, the one customers used when they drank coffee inside. The chairs made that soft scrape sound on the tile. The ovens kept humming behind me like they didn't care what was happening in the front of the shop. Ainsley sat across from me with her hands folded, nails perfectly done, posture straight. She looked comfortable. My dad pulled out a folder. Thick paper, a legal-looking logo on the corner. He set it down between us like it was a menu. "We've been thinking about the future of the bakery," he said. My stomach tightened in a quiet way, not panic, just that internal shift where your body knows something is coming. He kept talking. My mom nodded at certain points without looking up. Ainsley's smile stayed in place like she'd practiced it. And then my mom said it, soft and clean, like she was reading from a line she'd already rehearsed. "We're going to sign the business over to Ainsley." For a second, it didn't register. The words landed, but my mind didn't accept them as real. I looked at my sister first, because I couldn't make myself look at my parents. Ainsley didn't flinch. She didn't look embarrassed. She just smiled, and for the first time that morning, the bakery felt too quiet. I didn't say anything right away. I rested my hands on the table, noticed the flour still caught in the lines of my knuckles, and listened to the faint click of the proofing cabinet in the back. Then I did what I always did when something didn't make sense. I went still, and I waited for the next sentence. My dad kept his palms on the folder like it might slide away. "Ainsley's got the business background," he said. "Branding, growth, all that. She sees opportunities we don't." My mom nodded once, small and careful. She still didn't look at me. Ainsley leaned forward, elbows close to her sides, voice light like we were planning a paint color. "I want to update things," she said. "A cleaner logo, better packaging, a real online presence, maybe local delivery. People expect that now." I listened. I kept my face neutral. I even gave a small nod at the right times, like my body was trying to keep the moment from getting worse. Then my dad added, "You'll stay, of course. You'll keep doing what you do best." It took me a second to understand what he meant. I looked at him. Stay as what? My mom finally raised her eyes to my face, just for a beat. Head baker. Head baker. Not owner. not partner. Not even a conversation about sharing the work I'd already been doing for years. Just a title that made it sound generous, like they were offering me something new instead of narrowing my world down. I turned my hands over on the table. Flour streaks, small cuts, the faint tightness across my knuckles from the cold air outside. I noticed all of it the way you notice things when you're trying not to react. Ainsley's hands stayed folded, smooth, manicured, no burn marks, no calluses. I said, "Do you even know the croissant schedule?" Ainsley's smile flickered, then returned, casual. "That's what staff is for." It wasn't said sharply. That was the part that landed the hardest. It was said like a plain fact, like I was a useful tool that came with the building. My dad made a soft sound in his throat, like he wanted to smooth it over. "She'll handle the business side. You'll handle production. It's a good balance." I didn't argue, not because I agreed, because arguing in that moment felt like begging, and I could feel something in me refusing to do that. I asked, "When?" "The paperwork's being finalized next week," my dad said. "We'll meet with the attorney on Tuesday." He said it the way someone says a delivery date. I sat there for another few seconds, then stood up. The chair scraped the tile. The sound was louder than it should have been. "I need to get back to the dough," I said. My mom opened her mouth like she wanted to say something gentle. I didn't give her the space. "The dough doesn't wait," I said, and walked back into the kitchen. The heat hit me first. Warm oven air and that faint sweet smell that lives in a bakery no matter what. I washed my hands and went back to work as if the day had not shifted. Scale, flour, water, mix, rest, fold. I listened to the mixer and watched the dough tighten like it always did. My body stayed steady. Inside, something else was happening, but I didn't let it reach my hands. That morning, customers came in like they always did. The front bell rang, coffee poured. I called out greetings without forcing them. A regular asked for her usual loaf. A dad ordered 2 scones and a cookie for the road. People smiled at me, thanked me, told me the bread was perfect. None of them knew what had just been decided at that little table by the window. Around mid-morning, Ainsley walked through the kitchen with her phone out, taking pictures of the display case and the chalkboard menu. She talked without looking up. "We should stage the counter better," she said. "More symmetry, better lighting. I can get a photographer." I was shaping loaves. I didn't stop. "The lighting's fine." "It's fine for now," she said, still cheerful. "But we can be more intentional." She said intentional like it was a new invention. My dad stayed near the office most of the day. My mom kept finding reasons to be in the front, refilling sugar containers that weren't empty, wiping the same spot twice. When she passed me in the kitchen, her eyes slid away from mine like they couldn't hold. By late afternoon, my shoulders started to ache the usual way. I cleaned down stations, rotated ingredients, filled out the next day's prep list on the whiteboard. Routine kept me upright. I kept moving until closing. After we locked the doors and the lights went down in front, my parents left first. Ainsley left after them, heels clicking, voice calling back, "We'll talk more soon." Then it was quiet again, just the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the old wall clock, the faint smell of yeast and sugar settling into the air. I stayed. I wiped every surface even though it was already clean. I organized the recipe box even though I knew every card by touch. I checked the flour bins and labeled them again, careful block letters, like I could bring order to something that had just been turned sideways. At some point, I sat at my workstation and stared at the starter container. The surface had smoothed out, calm and alive, as if nothing in the world had changed. That's when I saw the paper. A folded sheet tucked under the corner of my recipe binder, half hidden under a stack of order forms. It hadn't been there earlier. I knew that because I'm particular about my station. I keep it the same way every day. I pulled the paper out and held it without opening it. It felt official. Thick, clean edges, a faint scent of printer ink. I set it down in front of me, lined it up square with the table, and placed my palms flat on either side of it. Then I just sat there, listening to the quiet, letting the moment settle. And after a long minute, I reached for the edge of the fold. I opened the folded paper slowly, like I didn't trust my hands to stay steady if I moved too fast. It was a draft agreement, not the final paperwork, but close enough to show the shape of what my parents had already set in motion. Names, dates, a transfer clause, a signature line waiting at the bottom. Ainsley's name was typed cleanly in the section labeled Owner. My parents were listed as the current members of the business. My name showed up once, not as family, not as successor, not as a partner. It showed up under a section called Key Employee. There was a paragraph about my role staying the same, about expectations, about production standards. Then a line that made my eyes stop on the page. A non-compete, 12 months, a distance radius, language about similar baked goods, customer solicitation, proprietary methods. It was written broad enough that it could mean almost anything, depending on who was holding the pen. I didn't tear it up. I didn't crumple it. I just read it twice, top to bottom, then once more in smaller pieces, the way I read new recipes when I'm checking for missing steps. When I finished, I folded the paper back exactly the way it had been folded and set it down on the stainless surface in front of me. I could have gone home right then. I could have shut the lights off and walked out into the cold parking lot and let the whole thing hit me all at once. Instead, I did something simpler. I stood up, walked to my locker, and took out my phone. I took 2 clear photos of the agreement, one of the first page with names and dates, one of the non-compete paragraph, close enough that I could read every line later. Then I put the paper back where I found it, tucked under the binder, with the corner just slightly visible. Not enough to draw attention. Just enough that whoever placed it there would assume it stayed unnoticed. I put my phone face down on the counter and stood still for a moment. The first shift didn't happen in my chest. It happened in my mind. I stopped thinking like a daughter who had been left out. I started thinking like someone who understood systems. I turned off the front lights and walked the bakery the way I always do at closing. I checked the back door. I checked the walk-in fridge latch. I checked the ovens and the mixer switch. Routine, quiet, clean. Then I went into the small office. It was a cramped room with a desk that had too many drawers and a filing cabinet that never closed right. I had been in there 1,000 times to grab order forms, vendor receipts, payroll printouts, cleaning schedules. I knew exactly which drawer held the label printer rolls, which folder had the health inspection reports, which stack of papers was always waiting to be sorted. I didn't touch anything that didn't belong to me. I didn't take cash. I didn't take records. I just looked. On the wall was our framed business license with the current year printed in bold. Next to it was the county health permit and the food handler manager certificate. Mine. My name was on the manager certificate. It had to be, because I was the one who took the training, sat through the exam, and renewed it when it expired. The county didn't care who owned the bakery. They cared who was responsible for safe production, who could answer questions, who could show procedures and logs. I stared at my name on that paper and let that fact settle quietly, not as comfort, as information. Then I opened the drawer where we kept supplier contacts. A simple binder, tabs bent from use, pages smudged from floury fingers. Most of the vendors knew me, not my parents. I was the one who called when deliveries were late. I was the one who knew which driver always stacked butter boxes wrong. I was the one who negotiated rush orders before holidays. I didn't take the binder. I wrote down 3 names on a sticky note, then 3 numbers I already had memorized anyway. Flour mill, butter distributor, packaging supplier. Then I wrote 1 more, at the bottom, and underlined it. The oven technician. He was the guy who could make an old deck oven behave again with a few turns of a wrench and the right part ordered overnight. I'd watched him fix ours more than once. I'd asked questions, I'd taken notes. I knew what kind of power draw our ovens needed, what ventilation was required, what usually broke first. When you work long enough in one place, you start collecting knowledge that doesn't look like knowledge until you need it. I locked the office, turned the key back to the hook, and went to the kitchen. The starter was in its usual place, labeled with the date. The same culture my grandmother started, the one I fed every day. It didn't belong to the business in any legal language I'd ever seen. It lived because I kept it alive. I washed the container, scraped down the sides, and portioned a small amount into a clean jar. Not a dramatic amount. Just enough to be safe. I labeled the jar with the date and slipped it into my bag like it was something ordinary. Then I wiped my station one last time, turned off the last light, and walked out the back door. At home, I didn't pour a drink, or call a friend, or pace the room. I sat at my kitchen table with the overhead light on, set my phone in front of me, and zoomed in on the photos I'd taken of the agreement. I read the non-compete again, slower this time. Then I opened a blank notebook, the one I usually used for recipe testing, and I wrote one line across the top of the page. Facts. Under that, I wrote what I knew without guessing. Ainsley was taking ownership. Paperwork was scheduled for Tuesday. My role would be reduced to employee. There was an attempt to limit what I could do next. When I finished that list, I sat back in my chair and looked at the page. No speeches, no planning out loud, just a quiet record of what was true. Then I set the pen down, folded my hands, and waited for the next morning. The next morning, I showed up at Hollis Bakery at 4:30 like I always did. Same back door, same key, same cold air hitting my face before the warmth of the ovens took over. I tied my apron, washed my hands, and started the first dough of the day. From the outside, nothing changed. Inside, I was watching everything differently. I listened to conversations more carefully. I noticed what got said in passing. I noticed what didn't get said at all. Ainsley came in around 7, coffee in hand, talking about timelines and rollouts. She stood near the front and asked one of our newer employees what her availability was for weekends, like she was already rearranging lives. When she walked into the kitchen, she looked at the prep list on the whiteboard and said, "We should digitize this." I nodded once and kept shaping loaves. By late morning, I had already made one decision that felt simple. I was not going to argue at the table by the window again. If my parents wanted this to be a business decision, I was going to treat it like one. That afternoon, during the lull between lunch traffic and the after-school rush, I stepped outside with my phone and made a call. Not to a friend, not to a customer, to an attorney's office. I didn't dramatize it. I just asked for an appointment to review a business employment agreement and a non-compete. I gave my name. I gave my availability. The receptionist offered me a slot later in the week. I took it. Then I made a second call to the county health department. I asked a basic question in a calm voice. If ownership changes hands, does the certified manager on file need to be updated or replaced? The woman on the phone explained the process, the timelines, and which forms were required. I wrote down the answers. Then I made a third call to the state licensing office, asking how a business license transfer is processed and what happens if the operating manager changes, but the production stays the same. More answers, more forms, more timelines. I didn't feel better. I felt clearer. That night at home, I opened my notebook again and wrote 3 steps, clean and plain. Step 1. Get legal review of non-compete and my current status. Step 2. Secure my own foundation, licenses, and compliance path. Step 3. Leave with notice, not noise. I looked at those lines for a long time, then closed the notebook and went to sleep. Over the next few days, I did my job the way I always had, but I also started collecting details like someone preparing a file. Not secrets, not sabotage, just information I already had, placed into order. I wrote down the names of every supplier we used and the terms we had, including who actually handled our account. I wrote down our delivery days, minimum orders, what items had seasonal price jumps, which ingredients we could not compromise on without customers noticing. I wrote down equipment specs, oven model numbers, mixer capacity, proofing cabinet temperature range, ventilation requirements. I wrote down which recipes were truly my grandmother's and which were standard, and which ones I had refined quietly over the years, the kind of adjustments you make without announcing them because the goal is consistency, not credit. At the bakery, Ainsley grew more comfortable. She started holding quick huddles with staff near the counter, speaking in a bright voice about efficiency and customer journey. She talked about packaging redesign. She talked about reducing labor-heavy items. One morning she said, "Croissants are great, but they're time-consuming. We could do more muffins, more bars, more stuff that looks good and sells fast." I kept my face neutral and said, "Croissants are why people drive across town." She smiled like she was humoring me. "We'll see what the numbers say." On Thursday, I went to the attorney's office after my shift. It was a quiet building with a waiting room that smelled faintly like paper and coffee. The attorney was a woman in her 40s with a calm voice and a clean desk. I handed her my phone and showed her the photos of the agreement. She read without expression, just moving her finger down the page. When she got to the non-compete, she paused. "This is broad," she said. I nodded. "That's what I thought." She asked me questions, practical ones. "Were you ever offered equity? Did you sign anything previously? Are you paid hourly or salaried? Do you have an employment contract now? Have they given you this document directly? What role do you officially hold with the health department? Do you have access to trade secrets? Or is your skill largely personal and standard to the industry?" I answered plainly. I told her the truth. I'd never signed anything like this before. I'd been treated like family until the moment I wasn't. My pay was decent, but it wasn't ownership level. My name was on the manager certification. My recipes were not stored in a locked system. They were in a box on a shelf like they had always been. She listened and said, "Here's what matters. In many cases, non-competes like this are difficult to enforce, especially for skilled work. But enforcement depends on state law, and it depends on the details." Then she said something that changed the temperature in my chest. "If they want you bound by this, they typically need to offer something of value in exchange. It can't just be, 'Sign this or else.'" I asked, "So what do I do?" She didn't tell me to fight. She didn't tell me to threaten. She said, "Don't sign anything without review. Don't quit impulsively. And document what's happening. Dates, who said what was provided. Keep it factual." I nodded. She slid a legal pad toward me. "Write down the sequence as you remember it." So I did. Not with emotion, with timestamps. Monday, announcement at the table. Draft agreement appears. Tuesday, ownership signing scheduled. Wednesday, Ainsley begins operational changes. Thursday, legal review. I wrote it out and handed it back. She looked it over and said, "You're doing the right thing by staying calm." I left her office with a folder of notes and a simple instruction in my head. Keep everything clean. At the bakery, the Tuesday meeting happened exactly as my dad had said it would. I wasn't invited to the attorney's office, but I didn't need to be. When my parents came back, my mom's face was tight, like she'd been holding her breath the entire drive. Ainsley walked through the bakery that afternoon with a new energy, greeting customers like she was campaigning. I listened from the kitchen while I worked. She told Mrs. Klein, "We're going to be doing some exciting updates." Mrs. Klein smiled politely, then called through the pass-through window toward me, "Mara, are you still making the blueberry muffins on Saturdays?" I answered, "Yes." And Mrs. Klein said, "Good." That night at home, I opened my notebook and added one more rule under Step 3. No speeches. Then I wrote a short list underneath it. Notice period, timing, new location, equipment, licenses, starter, staff. It wasn't a dream list. It was a build list. And for the first time since the announcement, I felt something settle into place. Not happiness, not satisfaction, just direction. The next morning, before dawn, I drove past a small, empty storefront I'd noticed for months on a side street 2 blocks east of the bakery. The for lease sign was faded from winter sun. The windows were dusty, but the space was the right size. I parked across the street, sat with my hands on the steering wheel, and stared at it for a full minute. Then I took a photo of the sign, zoomed in on the number, and saved it. Back at the bakery, I worked the morning rush like always. But when the last customer left and the bell went quiet again, I stepped into the back hall, pulled my phone out, and typed one short message to the leasing number. "I'm interested in the storefront on Maple Street. Can I see it this week?" Then I put the phone back in my pocket, washed my hands, and went back to the dough. And I waited for the reply. A reply came in that afternoon while I was weighing out butter. "Available Thursday at 5:30. Bring ID." I read it once, then locked my phone and put it back in my pocket. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't change my expression. I finished the batch I was on and moved to the next task. At Hollis Bakery, the week started to feel like two different clocks running at the same time. The front of house was Ainsley's clock. Branding talk, new labels, photos, a brighter tone with customers. The kitchen was my clock. Fermentation, temperature, timers, quiet repetition. Ainsley began leaving notes for me on the prep board. Reduce waste on laminated dough. Consider removing rye, low margin. Train staff to upsell pastries. I erased them when I needed the space and rewrote the actual production list underneath. On Wednesday, she asked me to step into the office, not for a chat at the counter, not in the kitchen where I could keep moving. The office with the door half closed and the old chair that squeaks when you sit. My parents were already inside when I walked in. My dad stood behind the desk with his hands on the back of the chair like he was holding himself upright. My mom sat with her purse on her lap again, fingers laced over the strap. Ainsley had a folder on the desk, a new one, thicker. She smiled at me like she was trying for calm. "We need you to sign some updated paperwork," she said. "It's standard. Now that the ownership transfer is done, it just makes everything clear." I sat down without a word. Ainsley slid the papers toward me. The top page was the same shape as the draft I'd photographed, but cleaner, more formal. My name was printed neatly where a signature line waited. I didn't touch the pen. I read the first page, then the second. I turned the page carefully, like I was checking a recipe for a missing ingredient. The non-compete was still there. Same 12 months, same distance, same broad language. And now it included a sentence about confidential recipes and customer relationships that made it even clearer what they were trying to do. I looked up at Ainsley. My voice came out even. "When did you decide to add this?" Ainsley's smile tightened. "It's part of protecting the business." My dad said quickly, "It's normal. Lots of places have these." I turned to him. "We didn't. Not once in the last 16 years. My mom's eyes flicked toward the papers, then away. She didn't say anything. Ainsley leaned forward a little, still pleasant, like she was explaining something simple to a difficult customer. "Mara, no one is trying to hurt you. This is just business." I nodded once. "Okay." I let the words sit there. Then I said, "If it's just business, then it can be handled like business." Ainsley's expression shifted. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm not signing this today." My dad exhaled, tired. "Why are you making it complicated?" I kept my hands on my lap. "Because you're asking me to give up options without offering anything in return. That's what this is." Ainsley's tone sharpened, not loud, but tighter. "You're being dramatic." I looked at her and said, "I'm being careful." The room went quiet for a few seconds. The hum of the old printer in the corner felt too loud. My dad tried again, softer. "We want you here. We need you here." I nodded. "Then keep me here under fair terms. This document doesn't do that." Ainsley tapped the folder once with her fingernail. "Everyone signs agreements. You're not special." I didn't react to that. I just said, "If you believe that, then you can hire someone else to do what I do, and you won't need this signature. My mom finally looked at me, and her voice was small. Are you threatening to leave? I shook my head slowly. No, I'm saying I'm not signing something I haven't reviewed properly. And I'm saying I'm not agreeing to restrictions that don't match how I've worked here for years. Ainsley's face reddened. So, you're going to go start your own place. That's what this is. I held her gaze. I'm not discussing my future plans in your office. I'm discussing this paper. My dad's shoulders sagged a little. We thought you'd understand. I said, I understand exactly what happened. You transferred ownership to Ainsley, and now you're trying to lock me into being an employee with fewer choices than I had before. Ainsley pushed the pen toward me. Sign it, and we can move on. I didn't take it. No. Another pause. Ainsley's voice rose just enough to show emotion. You're going to ruin this. You're going to ruin everything Grandma built. I didn't argue with the sentence. I just corrected the facts. Grandma built this with hands-on work and consistent quality. If you want to honor that, the way to do it is to keep the product right and treat the people doing the work with respect. A contract doesn't replace that. My dad looked like he wanted to end the conversation. My mom looked like she wanted to disappear. Ainsley stared at me, then said, Fine, don't sign it today, but you will. I stood up. I smoothed my apron once, an automatic motion. I won't sign anything without review, I said. That's the rule. Then I added, still calm, if you want to keep me as head baker, we can talk about a real agreement. Pay, terms, and a role that reflects what I actually do. If not, you'll need to plan for how the bakery runs without me. My dad opened his mouth, then closed it again. I walked out of the office and back into the kitchen. I washed my hands, checked the proofing cabinet, and finished the shift. At closing, I didn't stay late. I went home, set my keys on the table, and opened my notebook to a clean page. I wrote the date at the top. Then I wrote, line by line, what had been said in that office, who was present, and what papers were placed in front of me. When I finished, I set the pen down, picked up my phone, and looked at the address for the Maple Street showing. Thursday, 5:30. Then I turned the phone face down, and I waited. Thursday at 5:30, I met the leasing agent outside the Maple Street storefront. It was colder than it looked. The wind pushed grit along the curb. The agent was a man with a clipboard and a ring of keys, practical, not curious. He unlocked the door, turned the lights on, and let me walk through at my own pace. The place was plain, a narrow retail front, a small back prep area, and a utility closet that smelled faintly like old paint. The floors needed work, the walls needed cleaning, but the electrical panel was updated, and the ventilation route was possible. I asked the questions that mattered: amperage, gas line access, grease trap requirements, dumpster placement, parking for early deliveries. He answered what he knew and wrote down the rest. Before I left, I took photos of the back room and the panel, and I asked for the application packet. At home that night, I spread everything out on my kitchen table: lease terms, required deposits, a checklist for business registration, a list of county health requirements, a separate sheet for signage permits. I didn't romanticize it. I treated it like a build. The next morning, I met my attorney again. She had my notes from the office meeting and the photographs of the non-compete. She listened, then typed a short letter in front of me. Not angry, not threatening, just clear. It stated that I would not sign the document. It requested that all communications about employment terms be in writing. It noted that the proposed restrictions were overly broad. It also reminded them that I had not received any new compensation or benefit tied to the non-compete language. When she printed it, she slid the page across the desk. "This is the clean way," she said. "Keep everything factual." I took the letter, drove home, and put it into a folder labeled with the date. Then I kept moving. Within a week, I did 3 things that changed my life without making noise. First, I registered a new business name. Not something clever, Something simple. My grandmother's maiden name was Graham, so I used it. Graham Bakehouse. It felt quiet and honest. Second, I started the permitting process. County forms, state forms, local forms. It was slow, but it was straightforward if you follow instructions and keep copies of everything. I created a binder with tabs and a checklist on the front. Third, I secured the lease on Maple Street. I signed it on a Tuesday morning, early, before my shift. The agent watched me initial each page. I wrote the deposit check from a new account I opened specifically for the business. I kept the receipt and stapled it to a copy of the lease. That same afternoon, I went back to Hollis Bakery and baked. Ainsley was louder in the front now. She had branded paper bags on order. She talked about a new logo reveal. She brought in a consultant who wore polished shoes into the kitchen and looked uncomfortable around flour. They started asking questions about portion control and cost per unit. The consultant wanted spreadsheets. Ainsley wanted changes. The work stayed the same until it didn't. One morning, she told me to swap our butter supplier to a cheaper option. I said, "That butter won't laminate the same." She shrugged. "We'll make it work." A few days later, she suggested cutting the proofing time to speed production. I said, "You can't hurry fermentation." She smiled like I was being stubborn. I didn't argue. I just took notes in my own notebook, the same way I wrote down oven temps, dates, requested changes, who requested them. At the same time, I built Maple Street at night. I hired an electrician. I hired the oven technician. I bought a used mixer from a restaurant supply auction and kept the invoice. I ordered shelving and assembled it myself. I painted the walls a warm cream color because it made the space feel clean in morning light. I also did one small thing that mattered more than most people would understand. I kept my starter safe. I fed it at home and at work, separate jars, separate labels, nothing dramatic, just responsible. 3 weeks later, my county health inspection for Maple Street was scheduled. The inspector walked in with a clipboard and an even expression. He checked hand-washing stations, thermometer logs, storage height, sanitation plan, and labeling. I answered calmly and showed him my binder. He signed off on the conditional approval and said, "You're organized." I nodded. I've been doing this a long time. That same day, Ainsley emailed me. Not a conversation in the bakery. An email with the subject line, "Updated agreement." Attached was the same contract, same non-compete, same expectation that I would sign. I forwarded it to my attorney. Her reply came back an hour later. "We respond in writing. Do not engage verbally. Keep working as normal until you choose your exit date." So I did. I chose my exit date carefully, like a delivery schedule. I gave 2 weeks' notice in writing, addressed to Ainsley as owner and copied to my parents. I stated the last working day. I offered to document recipes and procedures for whoever replaced me within reasonable limits. I did not mention Maple Street. I did not mention my plans. Ainsley reacted exactly the way she always did when she didn't get what she expected. She called me into the office again. She held my notice letter in her hand like it was an insult. "You're doing this to punish us," she said. I stayed calm. "I'm doing it to take responsibility for my own work." My dad asked quietly, "Where will you go?" I answered honestly without details. "To my own place." Ainsley's face tightened. "That violates the non-compete." I said, "I haven't signed it." She looked at my parents like she wanted backup. My mom's mouth opened, then closed. 2 days later, a cease and desist letter arrived at my apartment. I didn't panic. I didn't call anyone in the middle of the night. I scanned it, saved it, and emailed it to my attorney. She replied the next morning with a short plan. We respond. We state the facts. We ask them to show a signed agreement. They cannot. We keep it clean. Her letter went out the same day. After that, nothing happened. No lawsuit, no court date, no dramatic showdown. Just silence that told me everything I needed to know about how strong their position actually was. On my last day at Hollis Bakery, I finished the morning bake, cleaned my station, and wrote a final prep list for the next day. Then I untied my apron, folded it neatly, and set it on the counter. Ainsley stood near the register with her phone in hand, watching me like she didn't know what to do with someone who wouldn't argue. My parents were in the back office. They didn't come out. I walked out through the back door, got into my car, and drove to Maple Street. The sign wasn't up yet, but the keys were in my pocket, and the permits were in my binder on the passenger seat. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the space smelled like fresh paint and new steel. I set my keys down on the prep table, opened my binder to the first tab, and reviewed the next morning's timeline one more time. The first morning I opened Graham Bakehouse, I got there before the sun. I unlocked the door, switched on the lights, and stood still for a moment in the quiet. The space felt different from Hollis Bakery. Not better or worse, just mine. The stainless tables were clean. The shelves were empty in a way that made me want to fill them with work instead of worry. I washed my hands, tied on a plain apron I bought myself, and set the starter on the counter. I had fed it the night before. It smelled right. Sharp and alive, the way it always should. I mixed the first dough in the new mixer and listened to the sound, making sure the speed settings were true. Then I checked the oven heat with my thermometer and wrote the temperature in a small logbook I kept beside the sink. I moved slowly on purpose. Not because I was unsure, because I wanted the day to start clean. At 5:45, I turned the sign to open and clicked the front lights on. The first customer came in at 6:05. It was Mrs. Klein. She didn't say anything at first. She looked around, took in the shelves, the simple chalkboard, the baskets by the register. Then she looked at me and smiled, small and relieved. "So this is where you went," she said. I nodded. "This is where I am." She ordered the blueberry muffin like she always did. I handed it over in a plain paper bag and poured her coffee. She sat at the little table by the window and took a bite like she was checking if it was real. A few minutes later, the bell rang again, then again. By 7, there were 6 people in line. By 8, the first batch of croissants was gone. Not because I made fewer, but because people took extras. They always did when the food reminded them of something familiar. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. The second week, I hired one part-time helper, a quiet college student who showed up early and listened closely. I trained her the way my grandmother trained me, with simple instructions and repeatable habits. Hands washed first, dates labeled, scales used, timers respected, no shortcuts you have to hide. A month in, I had enough rhythm to breathe again. The schedule was still heavy, but it was my schedule. I wasn't waiting for someone else to approve my work, or reduce it to a cost line, or talk over it with a bright voice. In the neighborhood, news traveled without me helping it. I heard that Hollis Bakery had started discounting heavily. I heard they had changed suppliers. I heard the croissants were dense now. I heard a longtime employee had left. None of it surprised me. One afternoon, a local reporter emailed asking if I wanted to do a short feature on new businesses on Maple Street. I said yes, on one condition. I told her I didn't want a family story. I wanted a baking story. She came in, took a few photos, asked about fermentation and timing, and left. The piece ran the following week. It was small. It wasn't dramatic, but it brought a new set of customers who cared about the work, not the name. People who asked questions and came back. A few days after that, my dad walked into my shop near closing. He looked tired. He didn't carry a folder. He didn't clear his throat like he was about to make a point. He just stood by the door for a moment, then came to the counter. "I didn't understand what we were taking from you," he said. I wiped the counter slowly. I didn't rush to make it easier for him. "I wasn't asking you to take anything from Ainsley," I said. "I was asking you not to erase me." He nodded like the sentence landed exactly where it should. "I'm sorry," he said. I believed that he was sorry. I also knew that apology doesn't rewind decisions. It only tells you what someone sees now. My mom came in twice after that. She ordered coffee, avoided my eyes, and left cash in the tip jar like it was a way to fix a gap you can't reach across. Ainsley didn't come. Months passed. The shop settled into routine. I expanded the menu carefully, not chasing trends, just adding what I could execute well. I kept the same base recipes my grandmother taught me and wrote small notes in the margins when I refined something. The peace showed up in ordinary places. In the way I cleaned down the counters at the end of the day without feeling a weight in my chest. In the way I walked home sometimes instead of driving, keys in my pocket, flour still on my sleeves, the street quiet around me. In the way I could drink tea at my own table at night and not replay arguments that never solved anything. One evening, after closing, I swept the floor and noticed a teenager waiting outside the door. She was holding a notebook close to her chest, like she didn't want to drop it. When I unlocked the door, she said, "Are you hiring?" I asked her what experience she had. She said, "None. I just really want to learn. I watch videos, but I don't know what I'm doing." I looked at her hands, clean, nervous, honest. I told her to come back Saturday morning at 5:30. I said I'd show her how to scale ingredients and how to tell when dough is ready by feel, not by guessing. She smiled and said, "Thank you," like she meant it. After she left, I turned off the lights and stood in the quiet again. I thought about how close I came to staying in the old kitchen forever, working under someone else's title, letting my work disappear behind a brand. Then I thought about a message I'd received earlier that week from someone I barely knew. A woman from a few neighborhoods over had written to me online. She said she worked in her family restaurant, and her brothers were starting to talk about taking over. She said she didn't know if she was overreacting, but she felt like she was being pushed into the background. I didn't answer right away. I saved it, not because I didn't care, because I wanted to respond carefully, with something useful, not emotional. Later that night, I made tea, sat at my kitchen table, and wrote her back a short list of questions to ask and documents to request. Simple steps, clear facts, nothing dramatic. Then I rinsed my cup, set it in the drying rack, and checked the starter one last time before bed. If you've ever been overlooked in a place you helped build, I hope this story reminds you that calm decisions add up. Quiet work can still be yours, even if someone tries to rename it. And if you want more stories like this, take a second to like the video and subscribe. It helps the channel, and it helps other people find these stories too. Also, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And when you are done, you will see 2 popular stories appear next. End of Stow.